and good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, December 18th, and we are calling a special meeting of the Board of Education School District 28 to order. Can you please take the roll?
Member Cassidy?
Here.
Member Beeftank?
Here.
Member Arms?
Here.
Member Gallinson?
Here.
Member Silvershack?
Here.
Member Baser?
Here.
And Member Weinstock?
Yep.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Good evening, everyone. The first item on the agenda is visitors' comments and presentations. For those in the audience who want to speak, please come to the microphone, and the limit will be 3 minutes. Do we have anyone that would like to speak before the presentation?
I shall go.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, Jenna Dixon. I was on the committee, and I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for listening and hearing about all the work that we've all put into this. And it was actually kind of an amazing experience for me to learn the process behind everything and what is involved in this, where it seems a little bit easier, emotional at first. There's a lot involved, so thank you.
Thank you for your time. Any other visitors' comments?
I'm Kathy McNamara, and I too was on the facilitating team, and I have students at Meadowbrook Elementary and Northbrook Junior High, and it was a really wonderful experience to work with district staff and with these community super volunteers, and we look forward to sharing with you what we found out, and as we kind of strive to match the quality of our buildings with the quality of education we're providing our kids. So, looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Raju. I have an 8th grader and 2 alumni from District 28, and I feel like I've been here for a pretty long time and been pretty involved. We came many years ago, pre-pandemic, when Meadowbrook was starting to fill, and said, you know, it's too small. We need better facilities. It's hard. It's been now, you know, through the pandemic, we've had to put it off several years, but just unfortunately at this point, it's just not an option. We have to pass this, either this time, whether you do it in the spring or the following. There just isn't really another option. I hope community members understand we have to do this for our schools. My only plea for the parents that you're asking to go out in the community, because it's hard. We did it kind of when we asked District 28 to change the math program. We came in for, I think, 12 consecutive board education meetings. We poured over data and brought it to the board and had meetings at Sunset and at California Pizza Kitchen. It's hard to put yourself out there as a parent and ask the community or the district for something. So I just ask, if you are going to send parents out to the community and be your spokespeople, they will deliver for you, but you have to give them data and support so they can go out and do it. They need talking points, they need presentations, they need a one-pager. Support them so that they can go speak on your behalf and talk to their people that live down the street that may not like what they're saying. And other people in the community, it's a hard thing to do, to put yourself out there. And you guys, the board and the administrative staff of District 28, you have to give them the materials and help them to help you. You can't just say, here's what we need done, go for it. You've got to support them. And I mean, we'll be vocal. The people that support District 28, we will be vocal on your behalf, but you can't send out a half-baked plan. You've got to give them support to do it. So that is my only plea. And of course, I will be out there as much as possible supporting you guys as you go out there, but please just make sure that we have the materials to go out there and speak on your behalf.
Thank you, Lisa. Any other visitor comments?
Hi, I'm Kristen Ware. I also was on the facility planning committee. I do echo all the thoughts and sentiments that were shared. do have to say, once we got the information, it was incredibly powerful. And it's crucial we learn to put forth this plan, not just for Meadowbrook, but for all 4 schools will benefit in a really critical way. So to kind of echo Lisa, once we have that, information in hand, I feel like the parents are going to come out in droves. It's just a matter of how to do that in the next coming months. So I was very appreciative to be on this committee, and the plan is great. Can't wait to take you through it. And yes, it's just a matter of getting the information out there. So thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to say a couple of things. I don't have any children at District 28. They're all alumni, but I'm a 30-plus year resident and obviously interested in the community. And I'm thankful for doing this. You guys are putting together a great amount of information to help people understand. And the education system is the foundation of Northbrook. I think that's really important to build upon. But as we start to talk about what we're building upon, the reports that we've seen come out so far seem a little bit lacking on some of the specifics. There are a lot of great questions that were put forth by the committees. I know there are a lot of hard work put forth, and maybe some of those answers will come out in the facilities presentation now. I was kind of hoping that the questions or the presentations they're talking would happen after the presentation, but this as it is, if we're talking about building on or demoing a building or something of that nature, we kind of need to see some space planning and some larger picture information on what that really looks like within a particular location. Right now, it seems like there's a lot of gray. There's a lot of ambiguity in what's coming forth. So I just look forward to more details. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other visitor comments? Okay. Next, we will hear from the facilitating team.
Great. And before we get started with the facilitating team, I just wanted to take an opportunity to have those members of the team that are here tonight. I know some of them are here, and we want to make sure that we have a chance to introduce those folks. So if you were on the facilitating team and you are present tonight, if you would just stand up so we can recognize you this evening. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. It was an extraordinary undertaking.
Yeah, this was a team that worked really hard through the fall. We met almost every week. It was quite an undertaking. I'm not sure they realized when they started exactly what was all involved, but they really stayed with us and worked really hard to try to put the information together that you will see tonight. So you'll see evidence of their hard work and really the complexity of the issues that we have facing us as a district. And they had some really thoughtful conversations, and I think bring some great perspective to the conversation tonight. So thank you for your time. I believe that we're going to start tonight with Chris Tennell. Chris is one of the consultants that has been working with us, and he's going to begin by presenting the survey information. Chris?
Thank you, Dr. Pearson. Really appreciate the opportunity to be back here. I think I was last here at the end of August when you guys were voting to engage us. So thank you again. Been great working with the district. Terry is my slide turner, so yeah, I'm ready. Let's go. So we, as part of the Building Tomorrow Together process, we conducted an online survey at the end of our process. We were able to get 1,100 completed surveys throughout that process, and we did a lot of different things with a lot of great support from Terry and the communications department to promote the survey, which included text messages, emails, postcards, flyers, and social media. So between all of that, we know that at least every person within District 28 got at least one piece of communication in their hand, on their phone, on their laptop, from their mailbox, that type of thing. So when we start these surveys out, We kind of start out with a couple warm-up questions. These warm-up questions are kind of straight out of questions that Gallup has been asking for years. And we're asking people to rate the state of schools in the state they live, and then grade the state of the district where they live, either A, B, C, D, or fail. Probably no surprise to anyone sitting in this room here that people rate D28 schools much higher than the state of Illinois schools. Okay. So this isn't really a question, a slide I'm going to talk off of. I actually just want to talk about that little box, a gray box there that says approximately 10%. You'll see you'll see a few tables like this as we go through our presentation, and the different colors don't necessarily mean anything, right? So green doesn't necessarily mean, oh, this is great. You know, the shade of orange or red doesn't mean, oh, this is bad. I like to look at these and just break them up into kind of bands. So generally what a color band represents is about a 10-point swing within that. So if you look at this, if you look at that middle column that says strongly or somewhat agree, you see those first two have about 81 or 82%, and then we drop down into to 63 and 56. So those are just kind of visual ways that we all can see where that data breaks up. The other thing I want to point out about this before we get into the data is you see 3 columns there. And we actually gave people 4 options on this question in addition to giving them an opportunity to say, I don't know. So the strongly and somewhat agree are actually, that middle column is actually combined responses. So the response options for this question were strongly agree, somewhat disagree, and strongly disagree. So we combine those. So that middle column you're looking at, we would call that total agree. That far right column we would call total disagree. And then we break out the strongly agrees because we look at any sort of extreme answer on the positive side as an emotional issue, emotional vote, or something that we know that could be helpful in terms of moving a referendum across the line, or something that we know people feel very strongly about. So if you want to go ahead, Terry. So this first section that we ask in the survey is we read a number of different statements generally about the district, and we give people an opportunity to respond. So if you look in that top green band, you're kind of in that 4 out of 5 people totally agreeing that supporting D28 is one of the best things they can do to protect the investment in their home and their property values. And about that same number also feels like they get excellent value in education for the taxes that we pay. So we drop down a little bit there and kind of look at that next band, and we have almost 2/3 of people willing to pay more taxes to keep our schools competitive. And then just a little less than that number, about 56%, saying that they trust district leadership to make the right decisions. Before everyone kind of panics about that 56%, I mean, that's a very kind of middle of the road, slightly higher number based on what the surveys that we see. So I think that's a very good trust number for both the administration and the board to feel good about. So the next band of statements that we have here, again, dropping down to, a little less than half, 44, 46%. As people like me can't afford to pay property taxes no matter how good the cause, we typically see that question split about 50-50. So, I mean, that's just an average. I mean, when you ask people if they want to pay taxes, I mean, how many people really want to? So that's kind of just the way that number is trending in districts that we're doing research in right now. And then not a lot of people, about 44%, agreed with the idea that our schools look just fine on the outside, but when you go inside, that number and the next one we don't show the I don't knows in this thing because really we don't use that category for decision making. But what that I don't know option actually shows us is an opportunity for communication or an opportunity for education. So when I was on the school side of this and looking at this data, anytime that I had around 20%, I mean, 1 out of 5 people or get close to that in that I don't know, that to me flagged something that I needed to talk more about, that people needed more information about because they didn't have enough necessarily to make that decision or to make a decision on that question. Hold on a second, let me just hit the last 2 real quick. So not a lot of people compelled with the idea that their schools are falling behind area districts. And then the last one I think is actually fairly important, but more on the total disagree side. So you had more than half of the respondents disagree with the idea that our school facilities are just fine the way they are and that nothing needs to be done. We also wanted to test how aware people were of the Building Tomorrow Together engagement process that we had done. And kind of that green section represents people that are moderately or more familiar, even some that attended. And then that blue section is not very familiar or not familiar at all. I know when you look at this and you think, oh man, 40%, that's not a lot. That's a great number for when we ask these questions in districts. I mean, we've seen programs that have ran over the course of an entire year with lower numbers than 40% in terms of familiarity. So I think that's a great testament to the project and the process and the work that the facilitating team did. So the next section of the survey, we wanted to test people's perceptions on priorities for building improvements. So we gave people 4 options other than I don't know on this set of questions, and they could rate them as a high priority, medium priority, low priority, or not a priority at all. So this is kind of that first band of what we would call higher priority items that we saw, which is safety and security and accessibility. Typically 2 items that always trend very high with these types of surveys and things that people want to look forward to investing in. So kind of that medium set, and typically the number 3 in rounding out that top 3 of high priorities is infrastructure. That's at about half in terms of a high priority. And then rounding out that list, the idea of changing classrooms, updating classrooms to accommodate best practices in curriculum instruction, and then addressing overcrowding. Then the final set we have, just kind of rounding out that list of questions that we asked, just kind of shows the rest of the priorities. So we asked about eliminating teachers on carts. We asked about cafeteria space, energy efficiency and sustainability, and additional space for small group or individualized instruction. And you can read how all those 4 rated out on this. We also really wanted to kind of poke at the idea of replacing Meadowbrook Elementary School. I know we had a lot of aha moments within the facilitating team about what needed to be done at that building, though that also happened amongst everyone who attended the 2 community workshops that we had. But we wanted to make sure that replacing a school wouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker with any proposed referendum. So the question that we asked specific to Meadowbrook was, studies show that it's cost effective to replace rather than repair Meadowbrook Elementary School. Renovation and repair of that school costs 64% of the price of new construction. New construction results in a school with minimum maintenance and repair costs for 20 to 30 years. As part of this plan, is new construction for Meadowbrook something you would favor or oppose? So 52%, so more than half of everybody who took this survey favored that idea. Again, you had about 17, almost 18% undecided or don't know. So also showing that there's an opportunity for people to really learn a little bit more about what we proposed in this question to be able to actually form an opinion on it. So then the next section that we did included gauging people's reaction to statements about a possible proposal. This section, I mean, these statements are intentionally written to elicit a response, to be kind of leaning one way or the other, so we can gauge what their impact may be during a possible referendum. So again, investing in improved school buildings now will benefit future generations of students and homeowners. You have about 4 out of 5, 80%. Drop down a little bit to the idea that our buildings need to change, that it's time to make improvements on that, with about 64% strongly agreeing, or total agreement with that section. And this one gets a little small. I apologize for that, but I wanted to make sure that we got everything that kind of grouped in this. And this is only about a 9-point spread in total agree within these statements. So we see that they all kind of resonate the same. And even if you look at that strongly agree column, we're in that 25 to 29% range. So we tested the idea of being a good steward of tax dollars, but it's time to move forward and address things with a comprehensive building improvement program. We talked about overcrowding. We talked about how this is a district of choice, and if we don't keep it up and don't invest in it, people might not come to live here. We again hit the idea of a long-range building improvement cycle, proposed the idea that for a medium home value, $500,000, this proposal only costs $1.88 a day, which is basically a short trip up the tollway. And also the idea of the district being invested up to $20 million in improving these school districts. And you see those all kind of resonated about the same. Yeah, I'm sorry. And then kind of our last group. What I want to point out here, though, is again, strong disagree numbers on the idea that our schools and kids are fine, that we don't need to do anything. That number actually kind of ties back to a very similarly worded question we had in that first section. And sometimes we ask a question about a concept different ways to test different language to see if there's anything that makes it resonate more or less as we go through the survey. So you had about 54, almost 55%. And then about 56%, 57% said that they're voting no on any plan that includes construction of new elementary schools. So that means that building a new elementary school, which we saw in that question that was specific to Meadowbrook, wouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker with the respondents that took the survey. Okay, so then we asked questions specific to a $94.9 million bond proposal. Let me talk a little bit about how we ask these questions and what the methodology is. So we intentionally asked this set of questions twice in a proposal. In a survey. We ask it, it's typically the third question in a survey after kind of our 2 warm-up questions about that. And we look at that as kind of a cold number, so to speak, to just try to gauge initial support. So we do that. We typically follow it up then with a question about the cost impact of that possible proposal. And then we go through the rest of the survey. So then we go through all of the survey that you just saw, all the results that you just presented, and then we ask that at the end. We call that our reconsideration question. And we look at the difference between those numbers as to how much or how little the information that we presented in the information that we had in the survey actually moved things. So our initial question when we asked people about a referendum, we had 51.1% favor that. We followed that up with an example of what the cost would be to the average homeowner. We saw support slip a little down to 42.3%. And then finally, at the end, with our reconsideration question, we asked again about the referendum, this time also including the cost information in that question, and we were up a little bit, up to 45.8%. I'm sorry?
What is the difference between the pink and red?
I'm glad you asked. I was just going to get there. So the pink is our undecideds or don't knows. So that's the people who were not able to really respond to this question positively or negatively. It was about 16% on that initial question, and it was exactly the same on the last 2 at 14.4%. They're an important group to consider because a lot of times I think it's easy to look at this and to say, oh, well, we've got 14% that we can kind of move over. Our experience generally is that a good portion of the I don't knows or undecideds are typically polite no's. So when you look at that number, you can look at it and really only expect to get a part of that number. You'll get some of them through if you run a good campaign, but not necessarily all of them as far as that goes. So that's where that is. Thank you, Terry. I did get a question to ask, to put some information together about how our survey numbers track to actual election results. And this goes through a number of different districts. I thought it was important to include just districts that were looking at a tax increase, whether it was an operating tax increase or a bond issue that resulted in a tax increase, because survey numbers for districts that are considering a zero rate bond issue typically look very different than districts that are considering even a bond issue with a tax impact. So you can see how the initial ask and then the reconsideration. So in other words, that initial ask would be that first question. That reconsideration would be that last question, and how they translate it over into election results. Yeah, that's all I have. That's all I've got.
Can I ask a question? Oh, no. Do you have any examples of districts that did not pass?
Examples specific to,
I mean, on that last slide, you had several different examples, but all of them were above the 50%. Do you have any examples where the election results were, that they did not pass, and what those numbers look like?
we have, there's two recent elections that come to mind that do that. One was a district north of here, and they were sitting at 41, 42%, and then went forward and then were unsuccessful. The other one was a municipal election that we helped out in back in the St. Louis area, and they were sitting at 35% going into the election, but they were statutorily bound because it was an annexation proposal to actually move forward with the election.
Sorry, just to clarify, the visitors' comments were at the beginning and we're not able to engage. So, I know, I'm sorry.
It's kind of silly to the comments before we even saw information.
Yeah.
That's procedural for all board meetings.
Yeah,
It's not- that's anywhere you'll go. That's how a board meeting is run.
On that district for, oh, sorry. I was gonna say, on the district further north, you mentioned that was in the low 40s and then didn't pass. Was that, I'm not sure how recent that was, but are they, do we have enough time since then that you know that they're cycling up again, or did they try again? What was the sort of next step?
They are still in the rebuilding process. So I mean, their number went from 41 down to 25. So they are.
When you say just north of here, was it in Illinois?
Pardon?
Was it in Illinois?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I was gonna ask if you, not like right this minute, but do you have the information broken down where you'd be able to cross-check kind of the profile, the typical yes or no on the referendum against what seems to be driving their decision based on their other responses in the survey?
Yes. Yeah, we have that information.
And that's something, I mean, is that something that you are able to at some point provide in a kind of actionable form?
Yeah, I mean, we have it in a big crosstab spreadsheet. So, I mean, it would be, if you're not someone who can look at that and make sense of it, if there were specific questions, if there were specific questions or information you want to know, we'd be happy to also provide answers to them, but yeah.
It might factor into any messaging strategy.
Correct, yeah. So we have, I mean, that breaks it down by age, by attendance area, by length of time in the district, in terms of how long they've lived here, gender, parent, non-parent, those type of things.
Can I throw one more in there? Is the, oh, sorry, hold on one second. I lost track of what I was going to ask. I really apologize, but shoot. Just had this, I'm really sorry.
There'll be another opportunity as well.
Yeah.
Yep. After we hear the facilitating plan, we can also bring in additional questions
Sure.
at that time.
Do you have any information about how much other districts have been able to move the needle in a short period of time? Has any district who's only had a 3 to 4 month run-up been able to move the needle 5 percentage points?
I mean, the 3 to 4 month run-up is pretty typical. I mean, in terms of, I mean, boards are usually making decisions in late December or early January. I mean, it varies a little bit in Illinois because you go from a March election to an April election to a March election. But I mean, that is typically, it's a very typical cycle for districts to move through. So what we did this fall was a very compact timeframe to do engagement. But I mean, the filing deadline for the April election is the same for every school district, across Illinois. So everyone really starts their campaign once they're actually filed to be on the ballot.
Well, if there's no
I'm
questions.
sorry, I have one other question. So, on this, so you selected the schools that have election results as yes, and I know you gave a couple of examples of recent examples. Would you be able to put together the same chart of either the same number or the same profile of school districts, not maybe the other types of municipal elections, where that initial vote was no, the election result was no, and how their surveys fared?
We can do that, yes.
Yeah,
We
it just
don't-
seems that we just chose the ones that were yes.
The
is how it
question
appears.
asked was only yes, that's all.
Okay.
Yeah. We have presented the question, but we can certainly follow up.
Yeah, we can follow up if we need to.
Are there positives or negatives to waiting until the next election cycle, the April 2026?
There are, and I think the facilitating team included a lot of
Yeah.
those in their report. So, I mean, when the facilitating team went through their decision-making process, I mean, they had all the information that they collected from the community workshops, from this survey, from other feedback opportunities. So they reviewed it all and condensed it back into a report to present to you guys. So they have that.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I remember now what I was gonna ask. Have you ever had a situation where a district like this was going through the studies and getting the information and then making a decision, they decided then to wait where there was an extended period of time? So in other words, instead of doing the campaign, they decide, oh, we're gonna punt to some other cycle, where there's a much longer period of time.
Mhm.
Do you see any sort of time horizon relationship there with future success rates? In other words, has you ever been in a situation where you saw, oh, well, they ended up waiting and it became a problem where they didn't do as well, or we ended up waiting and it did better? If you do wait that longer period of time, do you have any data points of that example, if that's the path to go down?
I mean, anecdotally, I can say yes. We've had districts that have waited and then worked to build more community understanding of what's going on, and then been successful. I mean, we worked with another district north of here who, after their second tracking survey, were sitting in the high 30s, and they paused their process and just are trying to build more community understanding of what they need to do with their facilities. So they're still in that process, so I don't have results yet at that point. But I mean, there are districts that do that all the time. There are districts that, I mean, if you saw from that chart, that had, low, high, mid 40s numbers, and were able to move forward and go on the ballot and be successful.
Thank you.
I have maybe a similar type of question. Do you have sort of data points around, I think you mentioned these were all districts going out for their first time ask, districts that have gone out for a referendum, either having recently failed another referendum or recently passed another referendum?
We have a few that we're working with right now, but I mean, I could kind of look into where their process is and how their surveys are tracking. But I mean, we generally work to make sure that the districts that we are involved with are as successful as they can be.
Thank you. So at this time, we'll pause. Chris, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And he'll be here. We can always call you back up. But wanted to turn to the facilitating team to present their report and recommendation as well.
Thank you. That's the kind of support we have. Good evening, I'm Steve Shimowski. Together with Tamara Reese and Gauri Brown, we're proud to present this report of the Building Tomorrow Together facilitating team. Our team was very collaborative and every member contributed to the report. and the general consensus within this report. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be part of this important community engagement effort and to present the community's recommendations for the future of our schools. This has been an insightful process for all of us, and we truly think our community members, parents, and staff have explored the best path for the future of our schools and addressed the charge you provided to guide our work. As we begin our presentation this evening, I'd like to thank everyone who took time to become involved. Thank you to the Board of Education for creating and trusting this process to improve our schools, to the members of our facilitating team, and to the teachers and staff who joined us as part of this process, and to the hundreds of community members who took the time to participate and provide their authentic feedback on their vision for the future of our schools. Here's a list of our facilitating team, and as you can see, there are community members, parents, and staff who participated in this process. We all commented on the professionalism of the staff, and we're very pleased to work with them. As we get started, let's take a look back at what brought us here tonight. In September, we kicked off our work together. The board gave us a charge to drive our work throughout the Building Tomorrow Together process. The board asked us to develop a community-led process to bring District 28 and the community together, to closely review the facilities master plan, to develop an understanding of the needs and challenges of our schools aligned with the future-focused strategic plan. We were asked to gather input on our community's perceptions, priorities, and aspirations, and to create a final report for the Board of Education with recommendations based on community feedback, facility needs, and financial responsibility. Here's the process we used to develop our recommendations for the Board of Education. We started with a series of facilitating team meetings in September and October. During this time, our team learned more about the district and school facilities. We used this information to develop the materials presented at our first community workshop in October. At the workshop, community members learned more about our schools and provided feedback that was used to help set priorities and gather information we needed to fulfill our charge. At our second community workshop, we used the community's input to develop facilities options. The preferred option was developed from feedback gathered at the second workshop. This option was shared with the entire community through the online survey. We then used the feedback from the building tours and survey and finalized our plan and recommendations, which we are sharing tonight. This is a look at the communication effort to inform the community about this important work. In addition, there were articles published in the Northbrook Patch and Chicago Tribune. I would point out that every household received 2 mailings, which are illustrated up here, along with an extensive digital campaign of emails and text messages. Now, I'd like to turn things over to my fellow community chair, Gauri Brown, who will provide more information on the community feedback gathered through community workshops, building tours, and through a community survey. Gauri?
Thank you, Steve. All right, so I'm going to share what the community feedback was through the various forums that we had. So at each community workshop, participants worked together to complete a small group activity. The outcomes of these activities were used to discover the shared views and general consensus of the participants, which are provided in an executive summary document that had been shared. We used the feedback from the first community engagement session and context from the work done to this point on district-wide strategic planning to develop a series of options. These 4 options were presented at our second community workshop, and the preferred option from that session is what you will see in our recommendations tonight. So this slide shares the 4 options that the facilitating team presented at the second community workshop. Each of these options address facility challenges to differing degrees and different levels by investment, different levels of investment by the community. Option 1 is what we call our status quo option. It only requires funding from the district's current budget, completes a portion of the facilities master plan, and that leaves $56.4 million in capital projects not completed. The funded projects would be completed over the course of the next 10 years using the $2 million per year from the district budget and fund balance. Option 2 fully funds the facilities master plan. So it would fund the $20 million from the district's budget, and the balance, $56.4 million, would be funded through bond funds. All of the work would then be completed in a 3 to 5 year timeline. And this includes renovations at each of the 4 schools. For option 3, instead of spending $21.6 million in renovation in a new gymnasium at Meadowbrook, this option would completely replace Meadowbrook Elementary with a new school, and that cost would be approximately $56 million. It would, in addition, fully fund projects identified for the 3 other schools that were identified in the facilities master plan. $20 million of the funding comes from the district's budget, and the balance $94.9 million from bond funds. Work would be completed in 3 to 5 years. Option 3, in addition, begins a long-range replacement cycle that would allow the district to be positioned to potentially replace another school in approximately 10 years. Finally, option 4 essentially accomplishes the same as option 3, a new Meadowbrook fulfillment of the facilities master plan and start of that replacement cycle. But what it does is it preserves the district's fund balance and operating budget by funding everything from bond funds for $110 million. So this is a summary of what we heard from our community workshops. We heard that there's a need to address facility issues, but there was uncertainty around the best path forward. We heard that thorough planning, transparency, cost efficiency, and a focus on creating schools that are safe, functional, modern, and comparable for all students across the district is important. Members that attended wanted more detailed financial, demographic, and logistical information, as well as transparency about the decision-making process for renovations and funding. There was also significant interest in making sure that there was an equal distribution of resources across schools and ensuring that all of the community needs and concerns were fully addressed. Option 3's emphasis on replacing rather than renovating Meadowbrook and meeting the needs of the other buildings resonated as a balanced approach and was the attendees' preferred choice at that second workshop. Transparent and accessible communication about tax impacts and funding strategies will be crucial to gaining widespread support, and we heard that highlighting property value benefits and community-wide advantages would be key to engaging residents without school-age children. There were some thoughts around combining elements of options 3 and 4 in order to provide a middle ground that addresses both the fiscal concerns while still meeting the educational needs. And finally, future-proofing facilities and aligning them with long-term curriculum goals was a priority for many of the participants. In addition to the community engagement workshops, we held building tours for the community at each of the 4 schools. There was one tour for each school, and we saw on average about 15 attendees on those tours. These attendees saw our building needs firsthand and had the opportunity to provide their own feedback. Those who attended the tours were also asked to share their thoughts on challenges, concerns, and hopes for D28. And then finally, the third element of the community feedback that we received was the survey that Chris just presented the data on. So this community survey, I just want to kind of talk through and highlight a little bit about that survey. So around 1,100 community members had completed that survey. The purpose was to better understand area residents' perceptions of and priorities for the district, and as Chris said, to test the support for a $94.9 million referendum. So that was the option 3 that we had just shared. And that was a preferred option that was identified through the second community workshop, as well as supported by the Building Tomorrow Together facilitating team. The survey additionally tested facility improvement priorities and statements related to the possible D28 referendum. as the facilitating team had time in our last two meetings to really digest the community survey and understand and analyze what we were seeing from it, some of the things listed here are things that we noted. So what we saw was that the district is viewed favorably by its community. There's general support for the concept of improving schools, but less support to financially invest in the cost, which could create an uphill battle for an April 2025 referendum. Survey respondents want to do right by their schools, but don't necessarily understand the need for financial support beyond what is already budgeted. A good portion of the community is not aware of the facility needs in D28 schools, so they don't know what those needs are. Taxpayers feel that they are getting what they pay for and good value for the taxes they pay. We saw the survey data doesn't necessarily provide a very clear path forward with support for $94.9 million referendum at 45.8%. And then we also observed that the demographics of the survey, which had 55% of respondents above 55, also mirror voter turnout from 2021 and 2023, where we have 61% of voters that were 55 plus. All right, I'm gonna now turn it over to my fellow community chair, Tamara Reese, who will talk about the analysis and findings that the facilitating team reached during our sessions.
Thank you, Gary. We used the facility information presented to us during facilitating team meetings, as well as community feedback gathered throughout the entire process. We summarized our findings as follows. Each of the D28 schools has notable and major needs that would benefit from a successful referendum. There are major consequences over the next decade if D28 is not able to improve its schools, including aging and obsolete mechanical systems, increased day-to-day maintenance costs, and continued space issues. Individuals who participated in the community workshops are more vested in the need to improve the schools. Conversely, those who did not participate in the workshops or tours do not have an awareness of the true nature of the district's facilities needs. The community wants additional clarity and specificity on how the funds for facility improvements would be spent and how each school will benefit from the improvements. Survey data indicate that there is general support for projects that will improve safety and security, increased accessibility, and added infrastructure needs. The facilitating team was also asked to make recommendations related to financial responsibility. Regarding financial responsibility, the team has the following to offer. The facilitating team has consensus that renovating Meadowbrook is not a good investment due to the high cost of renovations and still facing more costs in the future. Taking a Band-Aid approach to addressing facilities needs will cost more in the long run due to inflation and increased costs of maintaining these aging buildings and deteriorating infrastructure. Asking for a smaller $56 million referendum does not seem as responsible as moving forward with the $94.9 million option. This was preferred by the facilitating team and those attending the community engagement workshops. The D28 community needs to better understand that this is the first time since the 1980s that the district is asking for funding to support facility improvements. The district needs to explain that it does not have the authority to borrow money without taxpayer approval, and bonds are like a mortgage, providing financial stability for projects and improvements. As we work to process all of the feedback and develop our final report, the facilitating team put together a list of pros and cons about the next steps and when D28 might consider a referendum. Since April 2025 and March 2026 are the next two available dates for the district to ask the community to consider a referendum, we organized our pros and cons around those two election dates. The pros of April 2025. An April 2025 referendum is able to capitalize on the momentum built during the Building Tomorrow Together program. The April 2025 election is likely to have a higher than usual voter turnout due to the D28 Board of Education election and the Northbrook Village Board election. Asking voters to consider a referendum in April 2025 allows that election to happen before the next triennial property reassessment in Cook County. Addressing facility improvements now allows them to be completed without any additional cost escalation. Once the referendum is placed on the ballot, it allows the community to decide if it is time to move forward. The D28 community understands, based on feedbacks from the workshops and the survey, that investing in our schools is one of the best things that can be done to protect property values. The cons of April 2025 referendum. The survey data show that only 45.8% of the community would favor a $94.7 million referendum, short of the simple majority needed for a successful referendum. For the referendum to pass, they need 50% of the vote plus one. That's of the people that go out to vote in that election. A campaign will require considerable resources in a short period of time, with a unified voice on the key issues in an information campaign by the school district and advocacy from a citizens group. Pros of the March 2026 referendum. Waiting until March 2026 will allow for more direct communication about needs and provide time for additional community engagement, communication, and education. The benefits to homeowners as identified in the survey are the same whether it's April 2025 or March 2026. Delaying the referendum provides the opportunity to reevaluate the plans and assemble a referendum package with additional community feedback. Once a referendum is placed on the ballot, it allows the community to decide if it is time to move forward. Cons of a March 2026 referendum. A March 2026 election will likely occur right after the homeowners receive their triennial property reassessment from Cook County. It is also unknown whether a D28 referendum would be on the same ballot with other referendums that could also affect D28 residents. Continuing with additional engagement ahead of the March 2026 election could create issue fatigue for our D28 community. Delaying the referendum could result in losing the momentum created in our process. Facilities needs will only increase with time. And the longer the district waits to address projects identified in the facility master plan or start the replacement cycle to address aging schools, the more it will cost. The facility team spent its final 2 meetings reviewing data and community feedback, evaluating these pros and cons of an April 2025 or March 2026 referendum, and deliberating on the best next steps. The facilitating team wrestled with this decision in light of the survey data, but ultimately concluded that there are more advantages than disadvantages to moving forward with a $94.9 million referendum in April 2025. The facilitating team recognizes that this is ultimately the Board of Education's decision, and the board must now deliberate on the next steps. One of the things to note is that what was happening right now is a needs assessment, and the survey took place the week of Thanksgiving, and it is a snapshot in time, and 55% of that survey was voters 55 and older. It was not an education campaign. What we did with our team was to gather where people's perceptions were, but not necessarily an education campaign. And that would be the same whether we did it now or whether we did it in 2026. So we would be having this same conversation next year to say if we were going to move forward with an education campaign starting now for a March 2026 referendum. And so we would go again, having more community sessions, having people, come. We would probably get a similar turnout and then do the survey again, whether those numbers went up or down, and then continue to have this conversation about whether or not to move forward. So in the event D28 does move forward to propose a facility improvement referendum, the facilitating team recommends that the board consider these items. The D28 community needs to understand that any proposed referendum and the path that we use to get to this option, so they are able to see the value they will receive from voting to increase property taxes. The entire D28 community needs to be able to see the same sense of urgency to address the facility needs as those who attended our workshops in our facilities meetings. Further information, whether in the form of communication about a referendum or additional community engagement, must provide specific and illustrated details about the improvements at each D28 school. D28 needs to ensure that it has pieces in place to implement an effective information campaign, which includes educating, listening to, and involving D28 administration and staff. We felt that this was a really, really important piece because the school board isn't necessarily recognizable. Dr. Pearson isn't necessarily recognizable. The people that are recognizable to the voters are the teachers and the principals. So if people want information, of course they're gonna get it from administration, but when they're dropping off their kids, they're gonna ask the principals about it. They're gonna ask the teachers about it. And everyone needs to be on the same page with the messaging and the information, and likewise, those people need to be listened to as to what their school actually needs. And the team felt really, really, that this was really, really important thing that we need to talk about before we move forward. Engaging with individual school communities and PTOs to build understanding and urgency, as their support will be necessary for a successful referendum. Supporting the campaign with clear information, enthusiasm, and creative ways to engage the community at large. We need to continue and enhance the following communication efforts. Provide comprehensive information to the community about the district's finances, budget allocation, long-term priorities, and the correlation between school finances and the quality of education and facilities. It was very clear that there is no doubt that in our community, we have very, very high quality education. I think that's why some of the people on that survey were unaware of what was going on. When we came into the facilities meeting, and these are very, very involved parents, we had no idea the extent to which the facilities needed help or how school budgeting worked. And as we've talked about over and over and over, schools are people. The budget, our taxes right now go towards the people that make our schools amazing. And so I think when we talk about the fact that we have amazing schools, when we talk about that the buildings are less than amazing, I think that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect. So increasing awareness and knowledge about district programs and continuing to highlight strength and quality of our district and how modern facilities will only make our district that much stronger. I think just one of the things I wanted to add that is not represented in any of the data here is the passion that this community has for our school system. And I'm not sure, I can't speak for Chris or the consultants, but when anyone in this community has been given the comprehensive information that we had when they first came to us, the district, and said, well, we have these $54 million in improvements, everyone was like, why would we do that? That is not cost effective for the taxpayers' money. Let's replace the school. When we went to the community at large in the community engagement sessions, no one was saying do nothing. Hardly anyone said, let's do the renovations. Once they got the full picture, they were like, yes, this is what needs to be done. And I think that once people start getting this information through an information campaign, that is the same sentiment. I mean, we have all these people that felt so strongly about this that they're coming out 1 week before Christmas and Hanukkah to show you how much we support the schools. So I think that's something really, really to consider that is unique about our district, that once they're very educated, it's a very educated district. They want our tax dollars to be used effectively and efficiently, and we want to keep up with surrounding districts. So I think once they have that information through an information campaign, parents will come out. And I don't think those were the same people that represented that survey data. So thank you for the opportunity to present our work tonight, and we are happy to answer any of the questions that you have.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your thoughtfulness and the comprehensive report and presentation. It was truly extraordinary. Wanted to open it to the board for questions and feedback.
to start. So, yeah, thank you again for all the work that you put in the presentation. Very, very much appreciated. I guess I wanted to maybe follow up on a couple questions I had, and the first actually relates to your last comment about sort of people coming around to the idea of the new school being needed. And so I wanted to maybe hear a little bit more about, you know, among both the facilitating team members and then others that you interacted with, you know, was there a general predisposition to or openness to the new school from the get-go? Were there people that were kind of nays that as they became educated, you know, became more in favor of the idea? Maybe you could speak to that.
So in the folks that I've talked to and through the facilitating team, and please add, I don't know that people necessarily were against a new school. I think people just didn't know. I know for myself, I didn't know, right? I've got kids at Greenbrier and I have a daughter at NBJH, and I don't know anything about Meadowbrook really. And so through the processes I learned, it just almost became this thing of why would we invest money in renovating a school when we're at that tipping point of it just is financially more responsible to replace it. And I think that's a conversation I've had with a lot of people, and as I've talked to other community members, and I think others have had similar conversations, I think people just aren't aware that it's at the point of potentially needing to be replaced. And once they learn it, they're supportive of it. It makes sense.
I think also we talked to a reporter, and the reporter was like, well, which of the line items was the community really pushing back on? And I said, well, there wasn't something that they're pushing back on. We're talking about that we don't have handicap accessible bathrooms. We're talking about that we don't have like very basic HVAC systems. Like they're not sexy things, but they're things that we absolutely need for our students to thrive in these buildings. And I think each of the schools is getting something that is going to make their educational environment that much better. And so when we had these conversations, especially about Meadowbrook, where especially when the architects came in and said their piece, where they kind of said there's really very little we can do with the state of this building. Also with the capacity, it's built to have 3 sections. They're in all of the closets in there. Like this facility is not meeting the needs of the current school population. And once we kind of had these conversations with people, they're like, why would we want to put our tax dollars in continuing to put a gym on something that we can't use? And so I think people they want their tax dollars to go to something. And then if we're not putting money into continuing to put Band-Aids on Meadowbrook, we have money for other things. And so I think once they realized the scope of the problem and that Meadowbrook was, you know, particularly ill-suited right now, that there really wasn't a lot of pushback on it.
I also think that there was enthusiasm for this concept of starting a replacement cycle, that it wouldn't be just Meadowbrook, that this would set us up potentially in the future to have a path to replace the other schools over time. And I think that resonated with a lot of folks because it's a forward-facing, kind of future-focused plan versus having to rehab the same conversation every time we have to replace a school.
And the survey gave us really good data for things like, it was at like 60 or 70% for things that they were supportive of, which were safety and security and accessibility. And those things are at the top of the list of things that would happen in this master plan. And that was basically cold calling people. They said, well, these are our priorities. Well, that's also the priorities of the facilities master plan. So those things align really nicely. So I think, you know, in moving forward in an education campaign, talking about those things is very helpful.
Thank you. And I guess maybe my follow-on was on the, you know, I really appreciated how you set out pros and cons of kind of, you know, moving forward now or possibly at a later date. I mean, I've been trying to think through, would an education campaign, do you think it would be more effective or maybe less effective if it goes for a longer period, and would it look different from one year to the next? Because it's either maybe a very compressed time frame or a very long time frame to be out there.
We spent a lot of time talking about that exact question. and went back and forth on it a lot. I think the pros to a more compressed educational campaign is that we've already started it. It's on people's minds, it's on their radar, and people are starting to talk about it outside of those that are involved in the process. And so it's really making a push for that over the next few months, versus the feeling and the sentiment was it's almost becomes a start and a stop and a start if you're doing the, waiting another year, because you wouldn't really start that communication cycle. You could do some things, but people get communication fatigued over time. And I think unless people know that, hey, it's definitively on the ballot, they're not going to pay a lot of attention to those kinds of communications. That was kind of the feeling. I don't. What
We've
else?
also talked about the fact that right now we're looking at $94.9 million, and that has been communicated to the community. And so the only litmus test is to ask them, and the only way you can ask them is on the ballot. This survey is not asking them on the ballot. And then the second consideration is that this will be most likely the lowest number we will ever see. Because if we go in a year from now, the number will probably be higher because of inflation, because of whatever is happening in the world at that time. So then people will say, well, no, you all said you were doing it $94.9 million. Oh, well, now it's $110 million. So if we went with 94.9 and they said no, and then we still have 100-year-old schools, and then we went again with 110, and they're like, whoa, what isn't it? Well, you said no at this point when it was 94 million, and now because of inflation, here we are, and now part of Meadowbrook is unusable now. Like, this isn't a problem that's gonna go away, and we're gonna have to keep asking the community, and that number is gonna continue to go up. And so because we have communicated that number, because we have had all these conversations and this momentum, we kind of wanted to see what it looks like.
I'd like to raise the point. One of the reasons we thought this was an urgent plan to implement was the fact that we do need accessibility in these schools. We do need safety, so clearly underlined here. And if it's urgent, we don't need to wait another 15 months to start. We can do that. We can start this spring, not next spring. And if it is urgent, why don't we do it now? And so I think that logic of cost, urgency, and true need are powerful drivers for looking for a March 2025 election rather than prolonging it for a year, thinking that we're going to educate people more. I think if people are interested, they'll be educated in 3 months. It's not going to take them 9 months to get the idea across or anything later. It would just be an unnecessary delay.
May I make a comment? So I really appreciate the work of the committee. It was very thorough. You guys seem very passionate and committed, obviously, with all of the meetings. And I like the way the presentation is laid out and everything that's been discussed. I agree wholeheartedly with the needs that exist in our schools. I was on the Buildings and Grounds Committee, out of which the Facilities Master Plan came. We were not talking about replacement when it, kind of when all the work came out from the architects. But one of the things that I think is also important for the community to understand is that, we had those items categorized for safety, accessibility, and I don't want it to be represented that, like, if a referendum for 94 does not go through, that the ceilings are going to cave in or we're not going to have HVAC. Like, I just want to make sure that it's balanced in that our schools are safe. Mm-hmm. And, I just don't want it to be portrayed that they're not safe and that our students are in any danger because, if we don't pass a $94 million referendum. So I just wanted to just put that out there because, that's very important for the community also to understand.
Go ahead. I just also want to thank you so much. I mean, the level of commitment and what you've done as a committee has just shown such a remarkable level of civic engagement and commitment to really what's best for kids and education in District 28, and we're just very fortunate to have that from all of you. And what would it take, because you're also talking about putting it out there on the ballot, but there's going to be a lot of people voting who aren't going to have that level of interest, right? And within that short time frame, how can that be remedied? We can put it out there, but if they're not seeing that sense of urgency and they're not seeing the same thing you're seeing within that short frame of time, and this is probably, I'm sure, something you talked about in your committee time and time again, how can you do that?
We really didn't explore the ins and outs of an education campaign, because it's up to the board to decide what we're going to do on that, and then where we go with a bond referendum
Probably more of
education
a-
campaign, that's another story.
Of a rhetorical question, I guess.
They did talk to us that there's certain voters that you're never going to get. There's just certain no voters that you are absolutely not going to get. So the goal of the education campaign would be to get parents that are on board with changing the facilities. I know there's a very large contingency of Meadowbrook parents that would really like to see this happen, but across the board, parents would like to the polls. That is the ultimate goal, is get people that support this to the polls.
I would just add, our focus over the last few months was to do what you charged us with, which was to understand what the community's desires were as it relates to this. We were not necessarily trying to convince anyone one way or another, right? We were presenting, here's what the options are, what do you think, here, and providing some information in that way. And so I think what would be different in terms of there'd be an educational campaign, but I think there would also be a push to, here is why we really need this, and more of that kind of door-to-door, person-to-person, go out to various community groups, and really make a case for why this is important, and have those conversations. That wasn't what we focused on, and even without that focus, the people that came to these sessions left, to the community engagement workshops. Granted, not as many as took the survey, but those were the ones that probably had the most information, very strongly favored doing this. And so we didn't spend a lot of time with those folks.
That's why we felt the bullet points that said, what would need to happen for this to be successful. We deliberated a lot on those bullet points. Like, in the short period of time, those are the things that would have to happen.
I was curious, I know there was a staff member on the facilitating team, and I think as part of you had mentioned, staff and principal, and I was curious whether you could share, and apologies, I'm not recalling if there was a data point in the survey that asked whether they were also staff members. I don't believe so. There was, okay.
Oh, they didn't show
So
us.
maybe we can get that, but maybe just generally, if you could speak about the feedback that you received, like from teachers, staff, and others in the district, if that.
Go ahead, Steve.
I think at our first workshop, there was a teacher there from Greenbrier, and he talked about the need to have to constantly be throwing circuit breakers, fighting floods in the building, and how there needed to be something done. Particularly, I also addressed the shortcomings with the auditorium in Greenbrier, which isn't really a used space, and represents a possibility for better using that space for other purposes. And I remember there were members of the board and also some other staff people there, but his speaking out to the group about the issues in Greenbrier was specific, and I thought, he said every teacher had a little horror story that they could tell about having to deal with the facilities, because they do need to be updated.
I think in general, the principals and the teachers did not have a lot of awareness about our process from a detail perspective. Like, I think they knew it was happening. They were encouraging people to come. They were generally supportive. I think they did not realize, I don't think the facilitating team realized what this looks like. That you do this needs assessment, you conduct this survey, then you have an education campaign, which is separate from all of this, and then you go to the ballot. So I think that process was not something that staff or administration really knew about. And I also think that specifics were something that they weren't able to talk about at any level because they didn't know, even to the point of what their school would be getting. And I think that's why that is the number one thing on our list, that teachers and principals need to know exactly what their school is getting, that it's helpful, that those things are going to be helpful to them and make their school environment better, so that they can be as supportive as possible when they're talking. They obviously can't be political about it, but in the information they're giving, that they feel confident that the information they're giving is as specific as the parents' questions are, because they are very specific questions. Even we had very specific questions.
I do want to just point out, the step before the facilitating team process, the actual development of the facility master plan did include building by building teams of staff members and parents in each school. And so that's where the list of the $54 million improvements came from. I think we do need to go back and close the loop so that people know now, based on their feedback and their participation in that process, what is included in their building plan, so that they can talk about that if we move forward.
Thank you. And then just one follow-up question, as we're speaking about the different schools, I know it's sort of like one grand prize, if you will, and then maybe like some consolation-ish prizes, just to be, like obvious about it, right? How do you feel like that can be balanced so that the entire, District 28 can come together, not just one side of District 28?
I think a couple things that come to mind and that we talked about. So, one, I do think there needs to be a focus on school by school kind of communication, specifics on here's what you're going to get, here's how it's going to benefit. I think we also talked about every child is going to go to Northbrook Junior High. And so really focusing some of the education and communication there in terms of what are we doing that's really going to, right, I think we've talked about there's going to be an expansion, a remake of the cafeteria, some of the other things. Those are things that I think any parent from any of the elementary schools could be really supportive of. So I think focusing on those things is important. And then I think helping folks understand this replacement cycle. And I know that, right, that's a longer term thing. It's not going to affect everybody that has current students necessarily. But sorry, now I'm circling back to something that I was going to say earlier. In the facility master plan that was laid out, the $20 million that the school district is planning to fund out of the operating budget, that would be over a 10-year period. And I think one of the benefits of doing it this way is that those improvements could happen in a 3 to 5 year period. So that could affect a lot more people that currently have kids in the schools. And then I think the last thing is to think about why people move to this district in the first place, and helping people understand the benefit regardless of whether it's Meadowbrook or another school that's being replaced, the benefit to the overall community in terms of home value and community value.
There was also some conversation particularly that changed over time, because if you're talking about Greenbrier, what the parents are thinking is, okay, we're now pushing in on a cart for Spanish. We're now pushing in on a cart for science. We used to have a science lab. We used to go to a Spanish room. So parents are seeing that more of the child's education is happening in the same space, which has some downsides, and it doesn't allow for a lot of the innovation that we're hoping in our district. And so classroom space was something that is on their minds. It's something that's on the parents' minds. It's something that's on the administration's minds. Like, we need classroom space. And so we wanted to make sure that that was something that was on the list and not for 10 years from now. So we went back and we're looking, and now Greenbrier is we're looking at an addition or something with the classrooms for Greenbrier by that feedback. So I think listening to the parents and for each specific school to see what, obviously we need usable bathrooms, HVAC, those types of things. But when it comes to, are we talking about a classroom or a playground? What does the community, what are they really rallying around right now? I think those conversations are really important when you're talking about, do I want to click yes for my tax dollars? And so that was a lot of the conversation that we also had was surrounding that.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about engagement of community members that don't have children in the district? Because I know that that's a subgroup that is often hard to get received by it.
I'll jump in on that. Seeing the number of, I was also a past president of the Northbrook caucus, so I have some experience with municipal elections and what goes on. Given that a large percentage of the voters are over 55, a lot of them are disconnected from the schools themselves. They haven't been in a school in 20 or 30 years. So they really need to be able to see some of the actual video inside of the schools, and I believe that's been done. I think Terry did a virtual tours. We need to be able to feature that. We need to be able to feature issues about traffic safety outside the schools. Not necessarily that the schools aren't safe, but what about the access to the school? What about the drop-off, the pickup time, the traffic congestion on the streets in front of the schools? You know, those are issues that drive everybody, and I think traffic safety around the schools is an important issue for the community. And it's not just property values, because renters don't particularly care about that, and so we don't pick them up in terms of an interest in a school budget. But the fact that we do pick up is the fact that younger children are getting such an amazing education here, and they're going to get that because we have better cafeterias, better access, better programs, and we can continue to hire wonderful teachers, which is really the core of the school and the core of our children's education. And I think those are key points to keep in front of the voters, and older voters recognize that their doctors, their lawyers, their children's teachers are coming through these schools now, and we need to keep that progress on a continuing basis. You can't stop tomorrow.
I think older voters are also aware of the current climate, and they are interested in safety and security. They're interested in upgrades to safety and security for their neighbors, for their neighbors' children. A lot of the people that came to the facilities team said that what their neighbors ask them, you know, what's the security like? Oh, is our safe? And we are safe. But one of the things that's really amazing about the upgrades over at the junior high is it really does tap into that, with that, especially with access and all of those things. And so I think it's something that's on people's minds and something that is deeply important to our community, even if you don't have kids in the schools.
I wanted to go back to just one of your findings or your thoughts was that option 2 would be irresponsible because it would be investing in a school that you might be replacing in the near term anyway. And I obviously understand that intuition. Did you give that any consideration in terms of whether it might be, you know, because of the lower number, less sticker shock and more likely to, you know, draw buy-in from the community as an option?
We did have some consideration on scaling back, but then we realized that now we have to go back again and ask for more money in the near future to finish the project. And so rather than buying a car one tire at a time, we should probably try and sell the whole package at once and be upfront with the voters so they know what we're up against and what it's going to cost. And I think that transparency going forward on that issue was one of the reasons why we opted for the $94 million, as did the participants in the workshop. They all felt that a half measure was not worth the effort.
Yeah, that's where we really tested that idea, was in that second community engagement workshop. And very few people comparatively chose that as a preferred option.
It's also going to be a continued drain on the district to continue to put money into those buildings that will eventually have to be replaced. And I think people really like the idea of not asking for money over and over and over again. Oh, well, we asked for $54 million and we did all those renovations, but we really do need a new school. We really do need modernization. So now we're here. So we're really looking out for the future, for not continuing to ask over and over again. And I mean, $54 million is still an enormous amount of money. And so if we could start a replacement cycle where we have new modern schools, you know, one step at a time, that really felt like to everyone like a better option.
To the point about going back to the community over and over again, I think we kind of understand that it's a good idea to be upfront about what the needs are. And maybe this question is for Chris, but one of the things that I think about is, okay, if we go forward with a referendum and it passes, great. If it fails, what are the implications for asking in the following cycle, or how far into the future would you generally see getting to a yes from a failed referendum? Because then that would also then set us back with time as well.
I mean, the opportunities in Illinois are limited, right? So you have April in odd years, and then March and November in even years. Should this go on the ballot and pass, like you said, fantastic. If it were unsuccessful, then you know the district would need to be rebuilding. I mean, our recommendation would be to be re-engaging the community and building towards a solution that may be more palatable, as opposed to just running the same thing again, because you know you've heard no on that in theory already. So the idea would be to try to go back and put something together that you feel like everyone could support. And I mean, you may end up in the same spot, right? After additional engagement, you may end up with the same issue, but maybe with better support or understanding. I mean, it's a hypothetical, right? So it's kind of hard to see, but.
But I'm saying, so for those where it has failed, do you see that in the future they pass, but it's for a lesser amount? Or?
That is one thing that can potentially happen. Is it's for a lesser amount, or you know, it's maybe even just the puzzle pieces put together differently. That is something that is able to engage the community and garner support. So there's a number of different outcomes for that. I mean, we typically do not see success in districts that just continue to run the same thing over and over again without taking the opportunity to gather feedback and listen and try to address some of the concerns that made that issue unsuccessful to start with.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
An important feature of the urgency of doing things now, a good friend of mine is a head cashier at Home Depot. He said that the cost of their materials have doubled in the last 2 years. You think about what we would need to build a school, if that's what we've seen in 2 years in building supplies, with concrete, steel, lumber, also labor. We could be looking at a much higher cost of replacement in the very near future.
Well, I think they built Maple for $37 million in 2018, and that was a junior high. And now we can't get an elementary school for less than $55 million. So that's a really big jump. And the longer we wait, the bigger that number becomes for the community.
Any other questions or feedback? At this time, I would ask the board to provide a recommendation. The steps would be, we would direct the administration and the staff to proceed towards language of a referendum. We are not taking a vote tonight, so we have a meeting date set if the board so chooses for January 7th. So, with,
Sorry, I
with-
said, I asked, how does this differ from a vote?
there's no vote right now, so people are free to share sort of their thoughts and guidance to proceeding, but it's certainly not binding, as a board action item would be. So, right now, we just need to, if there's feedback that people want to express publicly with regard to the direction that they want the administration to take, I would welcome that feedback at this time. So the options in front of us would be to recommend that language be drafted accordingly. Could be according to the recommendations of the committee. It could be differing language, or it could be a recommendation not to proceed with language for this election. At this time, we just need to provide some guidance to the extent the board is willing to share.
Well, then my vote that is not a vote is that we move forward with the recommendation.
Thank you, Beth.
I agree. I would like to move ahead with forming language based on the recommendation of the committee.
I would agree with that as well. I think, as the teams acknowledge, we have a tough decision in terms of trying to best position the district, and at a minimum, I'd like to see what that language would look like, and we can consider to think about that.
Thank you. Any other feedback?
I mean, I think similar to what Adam said, I think it's good to get the language prepared under the understanding that I don't think we're in a position to, I'm not personally in a position to make some sort of a decision at this point. We just saw a lot of really great information, and thank you for all the work that everybody's put in. But, I think it certainly makes sense to prepare for whatever scenario might occur, and that includes writing up the language. So, if that's all this is just sort of recommending that, providing the guidance, then yes.
Correct. We can take all of tonight under advisement. Should there be additional feedback from Chris and others, we certainly could take that into account and proceed accordingly. So that's my recommendation, is just to hear from others. If others have any thoughts.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So if the direction is for the administration to form the question with, the folks who help create the question for the actual referendum for the bond.
Correct.
Then what would we be voting on the 7th? Would it be to move forward with the question as they write it for the ballot?
So you would be approving a referendum question. So you would look at what they drafted and then make a determination whether or not you were in favor of it or not, and then you would take a vote on that referendum question and direct us. There's actually a resolution that you have to pass that directs us to place it on the ballot in that format. Now, at that meeting, you would have the ability to change. Let's say you had a discussion there and you changed the amount. You could do that if you wanted to, but we would have the question drafted for you, and then you would pass the resolution directing us to place the resolution on the ballot.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification.
Could I also ask, if I would like to see the language drafted from what we've talked about, but part of the conversation would also be, whether we would put it on the 2025 ballot or the 2026 ballot, correct?
That could be
Part of it.
part of the discussion.
Okay.
If the board so chooses.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
I want to correct them.
Sorry, just to clarify what Chris is saying. When I was saying following the recommendation of the committee, I was saying following the recommendation of going for 2025.
Correct.
Chris, you're saying that you would want to see language for both years and then make that decision in January?
I think that's something that we need to talk about. I would like us to be able to talk about at greater length.
Correct. So we have the ability to revise the drafted language that would be in front of us. And pardon me, the date is Wednesday, January. The potential date would be Wednesday, January.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. any other feedback? I appreciate everyone's thoughtfulness. Hearing the support of the board, would endorse the administration, the staff, and otherwise to proceed to the next steps. So, again, with our great and sincere appreciation to all of you, to everyone who came tonight. It was truly an extraordinary community effort and one that we're very proud of. The process is always important, the transparency, the collaboration, the ability to interact with groups in a very positive, civil, and community manner is really important, and it's just wonderful to see that in action. So, hearing no other comments, we have the direction in front of us, and again, with our appreciation. Everyone is welcome to, we just have one item on the agenda, being a public meeting tonight. We have brief business to conduct. There is a consent agenda in front of the board that was presented in the board packet concerning payroll. The December bills were presented to the board. I had the bills for this month. I met with Jessica. Jessica and I reviewed any questions. Everything looked great. Does anyone have any items to pull out of the consent agenda? No? Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Member Arms?
Aye.
Member Cassidy?
Aye.
Member Beefting?
Aye.
Member Silvershack?
Aye.
Member Baser?
Aye.
Member Weinstock?
Aye.
And President Gallanza.
Aye. We have a motion to go into closed session to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district, including testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee or against legal counsel for the district to determine its validity as authorized by statute. Also, student disciplinary cases pursuant to statute. Do we have a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Member Silvershack?
Aye.
Member Weinstock?
Aye.
President Gallanza?
Aye.
Member Cassidy?
Aye.
Member Beefting?
Aye.
Member Arms?
Aye.
And Member Baser?
Aye.
There is no further business on the agenda for after the closed session. So with our appreciation for the technology team, we will be ending the recording. Everyone have a good evening and happy and safe